the end of the 1st century, and it depicts an individual with their arms raised in an act of worship, worshiping a man with a donkey's head who's being crucified.
Whoa.
And right beside it, it says Alexamenos worships his god in Greek.
Imagine walking through the ruins of ancient Rome and suddenly noticing something scratched into a wall nearly 2,000 years ago. It is crude, it is strange, and at first glance, it looks almost like a childish drawing. But when archaeologists examined it more carefully, they realized they were looking at something far more important. It was not a Roman monument. It was not an imperial inscription. It was not a beautiful work of art. It was graffiti. And yet, hidden inside this rough drawing is a remarkable glimpse into what some Romans believed about the followers of Jesus and how they reacted to the Christian message. For centuries, people have questioned whether Jesus was really known in the ancient world, whether early Christians actually existed as a recognizable movement, and whether the story of his crucifixion was simply a later invention. But one ancient Roman wall tells a very different story. And what makes it even more fascinating is that the person who created this graffiti probably wasn't trying to preserve history at all. They were making fun of someone. Before we uncover what this ancient graffiti actually shows, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because we are going deep into one of the strangest archaeological discoveries connected to early Christianity. Now, let's travel back nearly 2,000 years. The discovery came from the Palatine Hill, one of the most important locations in ancient Rome. The graffiti was found in 1857 in a building known as the Pedagogium, an area associated with the Imperial complex where enslaved people connected with the Imperial household may have received training. The inscription was scratched directly into plaster. At first glance, it looks almost childish. But look more carefully. A human figure is shown standing before another figure hanging from a cross. Yet, there is something deliberately strange about the crucified figure. Its head appears to be that of a donkey, and beside the image is an inscription written in ancient Greek. The words essentially say, Alexamenos worships his god. The official archaeological description identifies the scene as probably mocking a Christian named Alexamenos. It dates the graffiti to the Severan period, around the late 2nd or early 3rd century AD. And this is where the story becomes fascinating, because whoever created this image appears to have understood that someone named Alexamenos worshipped a crucified figure. The artist simply turned that belief into an insult. To modern people, the donkey's head can seem completely bizarre. Why would anyone portray a god, or Jesus, as a donkey? The answer probably lies in ancient religious insults. Christianity was still a minority movement in the Roman world, and Christians were sometimes accused by outsiders of bizarre or ridiculous religious practices. The graffito appears to exploit that hostile perception. Instead of presenting the crucified figure with dignity, the artist gives him an animal's head. The purpose was humiliation. Imagine a schoolboy drawing an insulting caricature of another student. The caricature does not necessarily represent what the victim actually looked like. It represents what the person making the joke wants others to think about him. That is probably what is happening here. The graffiti is not saying, "This is what Jesus really looked like." It is saying something closer to, "Look at this ridiculous person worshiping a crucified donkey." And ironically, that insult may preserve something extremely valuable. It reveals that the idea of worshiping a crucified figure was already recognizable enough in Roman society to be mocked. This is where the ancient wall becomes particularly significant. The New Testament places the crucifixion of Jesus at the center of the Christian message. The Gospel of Mark records the crucifixion in vivid detail, describing Jesus being taken to Golgotha and crucified. The Gospel of John similarly describes Jesus being executed on a cross. And Paul, writing much earlier than many surviving Christian manuscripts, repeatedly emphasizes the crucifixion. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 23, Paul says, "We preach Christ crucified." That statement is astonishing when you understand the cultural environment. The cross was not originally a beautiful Christian symbol. It was an instrument of Roman execution. Crucifixion was associated with humiliation, punishment, and disgrace. So why would the earliest Christians invent a religion centered on a crucified Messiah? From the perspective of Roman society, it sounded absurd. And that is precisely why the Alexamenos Graffito is so interesting. An outsider appears to be laughing at Christians because they worshipped someone who had been crucified. The insult only works if the audience understands the Christian claim. Who exactly was Alexamenos? We do not know. His identity has been debated, and we cannot confidently reconstruct his entire life from a few scratched lines. But the graffiti preserves his name. Some interpretations suggest he may have been an enslaved person associated with the Imperial household. If that is correct, the image becomes even more remarkable. Imagine being a Christian in the enormous machinery of Imperial Rome. You belong to a movement that worships a crucified Messiah, and someone decides to ridicule you by scratching your faith onto a wall. Yet your name survives for almost 2,000 years. The emperor's personal victories could be celebrated in marble. The gods could receive magnificent temples. But a crude insult scratched into plaster has survived as one of the earliest visual windows into Christian belief. Perhaps the strangest part of this entire story is the irony. The person who scratched the image probably wanted to humiliate Alexamenos. They wanted Christianity to look ridiculous. They wanted the cross to become a joke. But instead, their insult became an archaeological time capsule. The mockery accidentally preserved evidence of what Christians were proclaiming. The man on the cross was not supposed to look powerful. He was supposed to look pathetic. And yet Christianity's central claim was precisely that God had entered human history through suffering, humiliation, death, and ultimately, resurrection. As Philippians chapter 2 verse 8 says of Jesus, "He humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross." The Roman graffiti captures the humiliation. The Christian message explains the meaning, and together they give us a remarkable glimpse into an ancient conflict of ideas. So, did this ancient Roman graffiti destroy the biggest lie about Jesus? If by that lie we mean the claim that belief in Jesus as a crucified figure was simply invented centuries after the events described in the New Testament, the graffiti presents a serious problem for that argument. It is ancient. It is Roman. It appears to be hostile, and it depicts a worshiper honoring a crucified figure while identifying him as a god. The image does not prove Christianity by itself, but it does something archaeology rarely allows us to do. It lets us hear, faintly, the voice of an ancient enemy. And that voice tells us that Christians were already known for worshiping a crucified figure long before Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire. The person who scratched those words probably believed they were making Christianity look foolish. Instead, almost 2,000 years later, the graffiti has become a witness to just how early the Christian message had already taken root. A joke meant to destroy a faith became a piece of evidence preserving its history. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. The wall was meant to mock the cross. But the cross is exactly what made the message memorable.